The void, an eerie, infinite nothingness, has fascinated philosophers, psychologists, and spiritual seekers for centuries. It represents both emptiness and possibility, fear and freedom. But what does it do to the human mind? Why do some people dread it while others embrace it? In this video, we'll explore the psychology of the void, its impact on our thoughts and emotions, and how understanding it can lead to profound personal transformation. The human fear of nothingness is deeply ingrained in our psyche, and it's not just a passing worry. It's existential. From a young age, we're conditioned to seek purpose, meaning, and structure in our lives. Society teaches us that success is defined by productivity, goals, and tangible results. The moment we face a void, whether literal or metaphorical, it challenges everything we know about ourselves and the world around us. This confrontation with emptiness often sparks an overwhelming sense of fear, as we are left questioning our very existence. It's the kind of fear that creeps into your bones, not because of any immediate danger, but because the familiar world seems to dissolve, and we are left with the chilling realization that we are alone in a universe that feels indifferent to our existence. This fear is amplified by what we call existential dread, a state of anxiety tied directly to the awareness of our own mortality. In facing the void, we face the realization that all things are temporary, and that, at some point, we, too, will return to the nothingness from which we came. It's an experience that can overwhelm the individual, making the very thought of nothingness unbearable. This dread is tied to the human need for purpose. If everything around us can fade away into oblivion, if we are just grains of sand in an endless desert, what does our existence even matter? This question reverberates in our minds, causing us to search for ways to avoid the void, or at least to make sense of it. In an attempt to escape the emptiness, people turn to distractions, comforts, or ideologies that promise meaning. We see this in the form of consumerism, entertainment, or even relationships that serve as a shield from the gnawing realization of our own insignificance. But these distractions are only temporary, and the void always returns, lurking beneath the surface. This creates a cycle of anxiety and avoidance that can be deeply detrimental to our mental health. In extreme cases, people may even experience a sense of disconnection from reality itself, a phenomenon known as depersonalization or derealization. Here, the void isn't just something external, but something internal, a distortion of perception where the world itself feels empty, unreal, or detached. While the fear of the void might seem like a modern psychological dilemma, it has been a central theme in philosophy for centuries. Philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Martin Heidegger argued that our awareness of nothingness is an essential part of the human experience. For Sartre, the void is a confrontation with our own freedom, and this can be both liberating and terrifying. Heidegger, on the other hand, described our awareness of the void as a confrontation with being towards death, suggesting that our recognition of our mortality is a defining characteristic of human existence. In both cases, the void is not something to be feared or avoided, but something that shapes the essence of who we are. When we turn to philosophy and spirituality, the void takes on a deeper, often more nuanced meaning. In Nietzsche's work, for example, the void is intertwined with the concept of nihilism, the belief that life lacks inherent meaning or value. Nietzsche didn't view the void as something inherently negative. Rather, he saw it as an opportunity for creation and personal transformation. For Nietzsche, the void represented the chance to transcend traditional values and embrace a new kind of freedom. His famous declaration, "God is dead," was not a literal statement, but a recognition that the old sources of meaning, religion, tradition, societal norms, were fading, leaving behind a void that could be filled with new possibilities. Similarly, in Eastern philosophies, such as Buddhism, the void is not seen as something to be feared, but rather as a space for spiritual enlightenment. Buddhism teaches that attachment to the material world and the ego is the root cause of suffering, and only by embracing emptiness, or sunyata, can one transcend the cycle of suffering and attain nirvana. The void, in this context, is not just an absence but a profound presence, one that represents the interconnectedness of all things beyond the limitations of the individual self. In these philosophical and spiritual traditions, the void becomes a space for transformation rather than destruction. It's a place where the old self can die, and a new, more enlightened self can emerge. This view contrasts sharply with the fear-based, existential dread we experience in our daily lives. While the fear of nothingness can paralyze us, these traditions suggest that by confronting the void, we can come to understand ourselves in a deeper, more meaningful way. The void is not something to escape from, but something to enter into with courage and intention. By understanding the void from these perspectives, we can begin to reconcile our natural fear with a deeper, more existential acceptance. Rather than seeing the void as a threat to our existence, we can see it as a gateway to self-discovery, growth, and ultimately, freedom. Embracing the void may not be easy, but it can lead to a profound shift in how we experience the world and our place within it. As we explore the psychology of the void further, we delve into how it manifests in our mental states. The abyss, whether internal or external, often finds its way into our consciousness when we are at our most vulnerable, during periods of depression, loss, or trauma. For many, the void feels like an empty space that can never be filled, a darkness that consumes them from the inside out. The feelings of emptiness that accompany depression are often described as a void, an overwhelming sense of nothingness that seems to swallow any trace of hope, joy, or meaning. It's as if the person experiencing it is trapped in an infinite loop of despair, unable to find a way out. In these moments, the void becomes a reflection of the self, a mirror showing us the parts of our psyche that we've either ignored or repressed. The internal void can feel like a chasm that stretches deep within us, leaving us with a sense of disconnection from ourselves and the world around us. It's a place where we question our worth, our purpose, and our very identity. This sense of disconnection can lead to dissociation, where the person feels detached from reality, as though they are observing themselves from the outside. The world becomes surreal, and the individual becomes a mere spectator of their own life, floating in a vast, indifferent cosmos. But not all encounters with the void are rooted in mental illness. Sometimes the void appears during moments of intense introspection or spiritual awakening. This can occur during times of great personal growth or transformation, when old ways of thinking and being no longer serve us. In these moments, the void represents a space of potential, an empty canvas upon which we can project new meanings, new possibilities, and new understandings of ourselves. It's not a place of despair, but of creative potential, where we can redefine our relationship with life, death, and everything in between. This dual nature of the void, both as a source of existential terror and as a space for personal evolution, creates a paradox that many struggle to understand. The void is a place where our deepest fears and greatest hopes meet, and learning to navigate it requires a balance between confronting our darkest anxieties and embracing the infinite possibilities that lie within the emptiness. The human mind has a remarkable ability to adapt to and process complex emotional and psychological states. However, when confronted with the void, whether through trauma, depression, or deep existential questioning, it can feel like the mind is overwhelmed, struggling to make sense of the vast emptiness. In particular, there are certain mental states in which the void can manifest in profound ways, causing a deep sense of disconnection and alienation from oneself and the world. One of the most significant ways the void impacts the psyche is through depression. Depression is often described as a condition in which everything feels empty, drained of its vibrancy and meaning. Those experiencing depression frequently report a pervasive sense of nothingness, a void that seems to swallow up not just their energy, but their very sense of self. It is as though the world has become a hollow shell, and the individual is trapped inside, unable to find anything that sparks joy, purpose, or hope. This internal emptiness can feel crushing, as if the person is caught in an unending abyss of despair with no way out. This experience of emptiness in depression is often accompanied by a loss of identity. Many people suffering from depression describe feeling as though they no longer know who they are or what they stand for. The things that once brought them meaning or comfort, such as relationships, passions, or hobbies, no longer seem to matter. The void, in this case, is not just an emotional experience, it's an existential one. The individual feels as if their sense of self has disappeared, and they are left adrift in an unmoored reality where nothing holds any significance. This is one of the most terrifying aspects of depression, as the person feels like they are losing themselves in the emptiness, and the process of recovery often involves not just healing from the pain, but rediscovering a sense of meaning and purpose. Dissociation is another mental state that is closely tied to the void. When someone experiences dissociation, they may feel disconnected from their body, their emotions, or their sense of reality. It's as if they are floating outside of themselves, watching their own life unfold from a distance. This experience can be deeply disorienting, as the boundaries between the self and the world blur. The void in this case can feel like an internal chasm, a place where the person is unable to grasp onto anything real or tangible. This sense of being outside of oneself creates a profound alienation, as if the individual has stepped into a different realm, one that lacks the emotional and psychological anchors that once kept them grounded. For many, dissociation can become a coping mechanism during times of extreme stress, trauma, or conflict, as it allows them to escape from overwhelming feelings or situations. But while dissociation can offer temporary relief, it ultimately perpetuates the sense of emptiness, as it removes the person from both the pain and the joy of fully experiencing life. The void also emerges in more subtle forms within the psyche during periods of introspection or profound self-reflection. In moments when we are forced to confront our own limitations, flaws, or past mistakes, the void can feel like an abyss of uncertainty, where we are left questioning who we are and what we stand for. This is especially true when we experience a disconnect between our idealized self and the reality of who we have become. The self can seem fragmented, and the void in this case represents a rupture between our aspirations and the present reality. This rupture often triggers feelings of inadequacy, guilt, or self-doubt, and the person may feel as though they are teetering on the edge of an existential abyss, unsure of how to bridge the gap between their ideal self and their actual self. At its core, the void in these psychological states can be understood as a disruption in the sense of continuity and wholeness that is essential to our understanding of the self. The mind relies on narratives, stories about who we are, where we come from, and where we are going, to create a coherent sense of identity. When the void appears, it shatters this narrative, leaving the individual feeling fragmented and lost. This is particularly true in the case of trauma, where the mind is forced to confront the overwhelming and often incomprehensible nature of a traumatic event. In such cases, the void can feel like a black hole that sucks in all of the person's thoughts, memories, and emotions, making it difficult to form a cohesive story of who they are. Trauma can thus create a rupture in the self-narrative, and the person may struggle to reconcile the version of themselves they once knew with the person they have become in the aftermath of the trauma. This experience of fragmentation and alienation is also a central theme in the work of existential philosophers. For Jean-Paul Sartre, the feeling of being nothing or empty is tied to the human condition of radical freedom. Sartre argued that the awareness of our own freedom forces us to confront the nothingness at the core of our being, the realization that we are not defined by any particular essence or purpose, but rather, we are free to choose and create our own meaning. This can be both liberating and terrifying, as it means that we are ultimately responsible for the direction of our lives. The void, in this sense, represents both the possibility and the burden of freedom. The terrifying realization that we are responsible for creating meaning in a world that offers none by default. For Martin Heidegger, the void is tied to our awareness of death. He proposed that we are all being towards death, and that it is this awareness of our mortality that shapes our experience of life. The void, in Heidegger's view, is not just an abstract concept, but a very real existential reality that we must confront in order to live authentically. Death, in this sense, represents the ultimate void, the final cessation of being, and it is this recognition that forces us to question the meaning of our lives. The void is, therefore, a reflection of our own mortality, and it is only by accepting this reality that we can live more fully and authentically. This is where the therapeutic potential of confronting the void lies. By accepting the reality of emptiness and mortality, we can begin to shape our lives in ways that are meaningful and purposeful, despite the inherent meaninglessness of existence. In more spiritual terms, the void is often described as the state of pure awareness or absolute emptiness that lies beyond the ego. In many Eastern philosophies, the void is not something to be feared, but something to be embraced as part of the process of spiritual enlightenment. The void, in this case, is seen as a place of potential, a space where the individual can transcend the limitations of the self and experience the world as it truly is, free from the constraints of egoic desires and attachments. This spiritual void is not an absence, but a fullness, a place where the individual becomes one with the universe and all of existence. By letting go of the ego and the need for control, the person can step into the void and experience a deeper connection to reality. This experience of the void is often described as a form of liberation, where the person transcends the fear of nothingness and enters into a state of unity with the world around them. Ultimately, the void manifests in various ways depending on the individual's mental state and their relationship with the self and the world. Whether it's experienced as depression, dissociation, or existential questioning, the void represents a rupture in the narrative of the self, a challenge to the continuity and coherence of who we are. And yet, this very rupture offers a chance for growth, transformation, and deeper self-understanding. It is by confronting the void, rather than running from it, that we can learn to navigate the complexities of the human experience and emerge on the other side with a more authentic and meaningful sense of self. Emptiness is often seen as something to be feared, a void that threatens to swallow everything we hold dear. But what if this emptiness isn't a curse, but a hidden opportunity? What if the very thing we run from, this vast, seemingly endless abyss, holds the key to our deepest transformation? Many of the world's greatest thinkers, mystics, and creators have discovered that by facing the void head-on, rather than running from it, they can find a path to self-discovery, reinvention, and even enlightenment. It is through confronting this space of nothingness that we can begin to see it not as a pit of despair, but as a canvas on which we can paint our own meaning. The first step to harnessing the void for growth is to recognize that the fear of emptiness comes from within us. The void, by itself, is neutral. It is neither good nor bad, neither destructive nor creative. It simply is. What makes it terrifying is our interpretation of it, our tendency to associate emptiness with loss, meaninglessness, and death. But just as darkness allows us to appreciate light, the void allows us to see the structures, beliefs, and identities that shape our existence. Without the void, we would never question who we are, why we live, or what truly matters. It is the presence of emptiness that forces us to confront the uncomfortable questions that ultimately define our existence. This is why so many spiritual traditions emphasize the importance of sitting with emptiness rather than avoiding it. In meditation, practitioners are often encouraged to let go of all thoughts, distractions, and attachments, allowing themselves to sink into a state of pure awareness. At first, this can be unsettling. Without the constant mental chatter of the ego, the mind feels lost, adrift in a sea of nothingness. But over time, as one learns to embrace this state, it becomes clear that the void is not an enemy, but a teacher. It is in this silence, this vast openness, that we begin to hear the whispers of our deepest truths. Many who practice meditation regularly describe a shift in their relationship with emptiness. What once felt like a terrifying abyss begins to feel like a space of infinite potential, a place where all things are possible, precisely because nothing is fixed or predetermined. This shift in perspective is crucial because it allows us to see the void not as a place of destruction, but as a space for reinvention. In moments when we feel lost, when everything we once believed in has crumbled, we are given a rare and powerful gift, the chance to start anew. Consider the way nature functions. Forests burn down, only to grow back stronger. Animals shed their old skin, feathers, or fur to make way for new growth. Life itself thrives on cycles of destruction and renewal, and the void, in its essence, represents this process on a psychological level. It is the place we enter when our old identities no longer serve us, when the beliefs we once held fall apart, when the life we built no longer feels like our own. Rather than resisting this natural cycle, we can learn to work with it, to step into the void willingly, knowing that what emerges on the other side will be a more authentic and resilient version of ourselves. This process of reinvention often requires us to confront the parts of ourselves that we have hidden away, the fears, insecurities, and unfulfilled desires that we prefer not to acknowledge. The void has a way of bringing these things to the surface, forcing us to face them without distraction. This is why so many people experience a kind of existential crisis when they first encounter deep emptiness. Without the usual distractions of work, relationships, or entertainment, we are left alone with ourselves, and what we find there is not always comfortable. But this discomfort is not a sign of failure, it is a sign of growth. Just as muscles grow stronger through resistance, the self expands and deepens when it is forced to confront its own limits. One of the most powerful ways to harness the void for personal growth is through creative expression. Many artists, writers, and musicians have described their greatest works as coming from a place of emptiness, a space where they let go of all preconceived ideas and allow something new to emerge. The blank page, the empty canvas, the silent room, these are all forms of the void, and they are essential to the creative process. True creativity does not come from filling space with noise, but from making peace with emptiness and allowing inspiration to arise naturally. This is why so many great works of art and literature are born from moments of deep existential questioning. It is in the face of the void that we are forced to create meaning for ourselves, to bring something new into existence where before there was nothing. Similarly, embracing the void can be a profoundly healing experience. Many therapeutic practices, including depth psychology and shadow work, encourage individuals to sit with their deepest fears and traumas rather than suppressing them. When we avoid the void, when we run from our pain or numb ourselves with distractions, we only prolong our suffering. But when we enter the void with intention, when we allow ourselves to fully experience the emptiness, we often find that it holds the key to our healing. By acknowledging the pain, by letting it be what it is without resistance, we remove its power over us. We begin to see that the void is not a place of endless suffering, but a place where suffering can be transformed into wisdom. Even in everyday life, we can practice working with the void rather than fearing it. When something we relied on disappears, a relationship ends, a career falls apart, a long-held belief is shattered, we can either see this as a tragedy or as an opportunity. Instead of rushing to fill the empty space with something new, we can take a moment to sit with it, to let it teach us what it needs to teach. We can ask ourselves, what does this emptiness reveal about me? What possibilities does it open up? What new path might emerge from this loss? The more we practice seeing the void in this way, the less we fear it. Over time, we begin to trust in its process, to understand that the emptiness we once dreaded is actually the source of our greatest transformations. Some of the most remarkable individuals in history have built their lives around this understanding. The Stoic philosophers, for example, believed that by accepting the impermanence of all things, including the self, we could find true peace. Buddhist monks practiced detachment and surrender, seeing the dissolution of the ego as the path to enlightenment. Even great scientific and artistic minds have described moments of inspiration as emerging from periods of deep silence and emptiness. Albert Einstein once said that his best ideas came to him when he was doing nothing, when his mind was in a state of quiet openness, free from distractions. The void, it seems, is not a place of death, but a space where new life is born. Ultimately, the way we experience the void is up to us. We can see it as a terrifying abyss, a space of loss and despair, or we can see it as a gateway, a place where transformation, creativity, and new beginnings emerge. The difference lies in our willingness to engage with it, to step into the unknown with courage rather than fear. When we do, we discover that the void is not empty at all. It is full of potential, waiting for us to shape it. And in doing so, we shape ourselves. At the core of human existence, there lies an inescapable truth. Life, in its essence, is fleeting. Time moves ever forward, unrelenting in its progress, and with each passing moment, the void beckons, the void of impermanence, loss, and mortality. Though many attempt to avoid it or distract themselves from its harsh reality, there is no escaping this fundamental aspect of existence. This confrontation with the void, particularly the realization of our mortality, is what ultimately shapes the human experience in profound ways. In fact, it is only when we come to terms with the inevitability of death and the emptiness that comes with it that we begin to live fully, authentically, and with meaning. The void of mortality, though deeply unsettling, offers an unparalleled opportunity for growth. In the face of death, many individuals experience a kind of awakening, an awareness of how much of their lives have been spent pursuing things that ultimately hold no lasting value. The pursuit of fame, wealth, and external validation often seems inconsequential when viewed from the perspective of our mortality. The realization that we are all bound by time forces us to question what truly matters. What, in the end, is worth our energy, our attention, and our devotion? This existential crisis is not something to be feared, but rather embraced, for it is in this very crisis that we begin to shed the illusions that have defined our lives. It is when we confront the void that we find the courage to live with greater purpose, guided not by the pressures of society, but by an inner compass that aligns with our truest values. The existential philosophers were keenly aware of the role the void plays in human life. Jean-Paul Sartre, for example, argued that human beings are condemned to be free. That is, we are thrust into a world without inherent meaning or purpose, and it is through our freedom that we must create our own meaning. This awareness of our freedom, however, is also a source of anguish, for it brings with it the weight of responsibility. We are responsible for our own choices, and we are responsible for the meaning we create in our lives. This burden is deeply connected to the void. Our awareness of the emptiness that surrounds us is what drives us to create, to act, and to find purpose. It is only when we accept that meaning is not handed to us, but must be forged in the fire of our own experiences, that we begin to live authentically. Sartre's existentialism emphasizes the importance of embracing the void in order to transcend it. To truly live, according to Sartre, is to face the void of meaninglessness and to respond to it not with despair, but with creation. He suggests that individuals must take full ownership of their existence, recognizing that they are not defined by any external force or preordained destiny. The void, in this sense, becomes a space of freedom, a place where we are free to determine the course of our lives. While the prospect of facing the void may be uncomfortable, it is through this discomfort that we find the power to shape our reality. In a similar vein, existential psychologists like Viktor Frankl have explored the role of meaning in human life, particularly in the face of suffering and mortality. Frankl, who survived the horrors of a Nazi concentration camp, proposed that the key to overcoming the despair brought about by the void lies in the search for meaning. He argued that, even in the most extreme circumstances, individuals can find purpose by choosing to approach their suffering in a meaningful way. For Frankl, the void was not a source of annihilation, but a space where individuals could discover their deepest sense of purpose. This idea is encapsulated in his concept of logotherapy, which asserts that human beings are driven by a need for meaning, and that it is through this search for meaning that we find resilience in the face of suffering. The void also invites us to examine the nature of attachment and how it shapes our lives. Attachment to people, possessions, and ideas often provides a sense of stability in an otherwise chaotic world. However, when these attachments are threatened or lost, through the death of a loved one, the loss of a career, or the disintegration of a long-held belief, the void can feel overwhelming. It is in these moments of loss that we are confronted with the fragility of our existence. The attachments we cling to are revealed as transient, and the void exposes the impermanence that lies at the heart of all things. While this can be an intensely painful experience, it also offers an opportunity for liberation. By acknowledging the temporary nature of our attachments, we can learn to let go of what no longer serves us and embrace the freedom that comes with detachment. In this way, the void teaches us not to hold too tightly to anything, for all things are in a constant state of flux. This lesson is echoed in various spiritual traditions, particularly those of Buddhism and Taoism, which view attachment as the root of suffering. In Buddhism, the concept of emptiness, shunyata, refers not only to the lack of inherent existence in all things, but also to the absence of permanent, unchanging entities. Everything, according to Buddhist philosophy, is impermanent, and the void is seen as a reflection of this transience. The goal of spiritual practice is not to resist or avoid the void, but to accept it as a natural part of existence. By embracing the impermanence of all things, we free ourselves from the suffering that comes with attachment. In this sense, the void is a teacher, one that invites us to let go of our need for control, to release our attachment to fixed identities and outcomes, and to experience life with an open heart and mind. This perspective on the void is not just spiritual, it is also deeply practical. In our daily lives, we often encounter situations that challenge our sense of control and security. Whether it's the loss of a job, the end of a relationship, or the death of a loved one. In these moments, we can either resist the void, clinging to what we have lost, or we can choose to step into it, accepting its lessons and allowing ourselves to grow. The void, in this case, is a mirror that reflects our attachments and fears, and by confronting it, we are forced to confront our own limitations and vulnerabilities. This process is not easy. It requires courage, resilience, and a willingness to face discomfort. But it is through this confrontation that we are ultimately able to move beyond our attachments and find a deeper sense of freedom. The void also offers a space for introspection and self-awareness. In moments of silence and emptiness, we are forced to confront the truth of who we are, free from the distractions of the external world. Without the noise of social expectations, material pursuits, or external validation, we are left with only ourselves. This confrontation with the self can be disorienting, even terrifying, but it is also a profound opportunity for growth. By stepping into the void, we gain clarity about our deepest desires, our true values, and the aspects of our lives that need to be released or transformed. In this way, the void becomes a sacred space for self-discovery, a place where we can strip away the layers of conditioning, fear, and self-deception that obscure our true nature. Ultimately, the void is not something to be avoided or feared, but something to be embraced. It is in the face of the void that we are given the opportunity to create meaning, to transcend our attachments, and to discover our truest selves. By acknowledging the emptiness within and around us, we are able to cultivate a life that is authentic, purposeful, and deeply aligned with the present moment. It is through the void that we find our greatest potential, not in spite of it, but because of it. The void is not the end of the road, but the beginning of a new chapter, a space where we can reinvent ourselves, explore new possibilities, and move beyond the limits we once thought were insurmountable. The key, then, is not to avoid the void, but to move through it with grace and courage, knowing that on the other side lies the fullness of life itself.